German army captain vanished in 1941. 84 years later, his hidden bunker was opened. March 17, 2024. The Masurian Lakes region of northeastern Poland. A team of construction workers preparing ground for a new tourism center outside the village of Jirlas strikes something solid 3 meters beneath the forest floor. The excavator operator, 52-year-old Piotr Kowalski, initially assumes it's a boulder. But when the shovel scrapes away decades of compacted earth and pine needles, he sees something that makes his blood run cold: concrete. Reinforced concrete with rusted iron bars protruding at precise angles. Military construction. This is Wolf's Lair territory. Hitler's Eastern Front headquarters sat less than 8 kilometers from this spot, a sprawling complex of bunkers and command posts built between 1940 and 1944. The region is riddled with forgotten Nazi infrastructure, ammunition depots, observation posts, supply bunkers that have lain undisturbed since the Wehrmacht's hasty retreat in January 1945. Most locals know better than to dig too deep. Unexploded ordnance still claims lives in these forests. But Kowalski isn't dealing with a known structure. He contacts the provincial authorities. By evening, a team from the Institute of National Remembrance arrives from Warsaw, led by Dr. Anna Wojciechowska, a specialist in World War II archaeology who has spent 15 years cataloging Nazi installations across former East Prussia. What they uncover over the following 72 hours rewrites a historical footnote that has puzzled military historians for more than 8 decades. The structure is a personnel bunker, approximately 12 meters long and 4 meters wide, buried at a depth that protected it from aerial reconnaissance. The entrance was expertly camouflaged and collapsed inward, deliberately sealed from the inside. When Dr. Wojciechowska's team uses ground-penetrating radar before excavation, they detect no unexploded ordnance but something far more intriguing: preserved organic materials, possibly paper, and what appears to be human remains. The excavation proceeds with forensic precision. On March 21, 2024, they breach the seal. The interior is remarkably intact. The bunker's hermetic seal created a microenvironment that preserved materials that should have degraded decades ago. There's a wooden desk, collapsed but identifiable, a metal footlocker, rusted but structurally sound, and in the corner, partially covered by a rotted Wehrmacht greatcoat, human skeletal remains. But it's what investigators find in the footlocker that transforms this from an archaeological curiosity into a historical bombshell. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that has barely prevented moisture damage, a complete set of identity documents: a Soldbuch, the military paybook issued to every Wehrmacht soldier; a Wehepass, the service record booklet; 3 separate travel permits dated between August and November 1941; a civilian Kenkart identification card issued in Hamburg, September 1941, bearing a different name than the military documents. And most startling of all, a handwritten journal, 127 pages, the ink faded but still legible, documenting day-by-day movements between July 29, 1941, and February 8, 1942. The Soldbuch belongs to Hauptmann Friedrich Wilhelm Becker, born April 3, 1911 in Flensburg, Schleswig-Holstein, service number 84312K28, unit designation 3 Company, Infantry Regiment 427 129, Infantry Division, assignment, Eastern Front Army Group Center, Operation Barbarossa. According to official Wehrmacht casualty records filed with the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht on September 15, 1941, Hauptmann Friedrich Wilhelm Becker was killed in action on September 2, 1941, during the Battle of Yelnya, approximately 380 kilometers southeast of this bunker's location. His body was reportedly buried in a mass grave with 63 other German casualties when his unit was overrun by a Soviet counteroffensive. The grave site was never recovered after the war, but the skeletal remains in this bunker tell a radically different story. preliminary forensic analysis conducted by the Central Forensic Laboratory of the Polish Police in Warsaw provides shocking results. The skeleton is male, approximately 165–175 centimeters in height, between 30–35 years old at time of death. Dental records, once compared with Becker's pre-war medical files obtained from Bundesarchiv in Freiburg, show a 94% probability match. A fractured left radius that had healed before death corresponds exactly to an injury noted in Becker's military medical record from 1938 when he broke his arm during training exercises. Carbon-14 dating of the bone tissue places death between 1941 and 1943, with a confidence interval centering on early 1942. The journal, authenticated through handwriting analysis compared against Becker's signature on 14 requisition forms archived in German military records, reveals meticulous planning for an elaborate desertion. It documents a systematic diversion of supplies, establishment of this bunker as a refuge, creation of false identity papers, and detailed plans for a multi-stage escape route that would take him through occupied Poland, into Slovakia, through Hungary, and ultimately to neutral territory. The official record says Hauptmann Friedrich Wilhelm Becker died a soldier's death on the Eastern Front in September 1941, killed by Soviet forces during one of the Wehrmacht's first major setbacks of the war. The evidence says he faked his death, deserted his unit, went into hiding less than 10 kilometers from Hitler's field headquarters, and lived in this underground chamber for approximately 5 months before something went catastrophically wrong. The contradiction raises questions that ripple through the historical community. How does a Wehrmacht captain successfully desert during the largest military operation in history? How did he survive for months in a bunker this close to Wolf's Lair, one of the most heavily guarded military zones in occupied Europe? What was he fleeing from? And most puzzling of all, if his escape plan was so carefully constructed, with false papers and a documented route to safety, why did he die here in this bunker, less than halfway through his intended journey? If you want to see what investigators found in that journal, the evidence that reveals one of World War II's most carefully concealed desertions, and the truth about how a German army captain tried to vanish during history's deadliest conflict, hit the like button and subscribe. Because what happened to Friedrich Becker exposes a side of the Wehrmacht that Nazi propaganda, and even some post-war histories, worked hard to erase. Friedrich Wilhelm Becker was born on April 3, 1911 in Flensburg, a port city on Germany's northern border with Denmark. He was the second son of Heinrich Becker, a mid-level customs official, and Margarethe Becker, née Hoffmann, a schoolteacher. The family was solidly middle class, Protestant, politically moderate, the kind of family that formed the backbone of Weimar Republic's civil service. Friedrich's childhood was unremarkable in every way that mattered for his future. He was a competent student, neither brilliant nor struggling, with a particular aptitude for mathematics and geography. His teachers noted his methodical approach to problems and unusual attention to detail. He wasn't a natural leader. His school 1929, at age 18, Friedrich enrolled at the University of Hamburg to study civil engineering. It was a pragmatic choice. Germany was beginning to recover from the hyperinflation crisis, and there was work for engineers. He completed 3 years before family finances forced him to withdraw. His father had been laid off during the economic contraction of 1932, and Friedrich needed to work. He found employment with the Hamburg Public Works Department as a surveying assistant. The work was tedious but stable, exactly what the Becker family needed during those uncertain years. Friedrich spent his days measuring plots, checking foundations, ensuring that Hamburg's infrastructure expansion met code requirements. Colleagues remembered him as punctual, thorough, and utterly unmemorable. His life might have continued in this comfortable obscurity if not for two intersecting events: Hitler's rise to power in January 1933 and Friedrich's marriage to Clara Morgenstern in June of that year. Clara was a tailor's daughter from Hamburg's Eimsbüttel district, 21 years old, with dark blonde hair and what Friedrich's journal later describes as a smile that made even the fog seem bright. They met at a civic orchestra concert. Friedrich played clarinet in an amateur capacity, and married after a 6-month courtship that was, by all accounts, genuinely romantic. Their daughter Else was born in April 1934. Their son, Wilhelm, followed in November 1935. These should have been Friedrich's happiest years, but the Becker family faced a complication that grew more dangerous with each passing month. Clara's maternal grandmother had been Jewish. Under the Nuremberg laws enacted in September 1935, this made Clara a Mischling-Zweiten grades, a second-degree mixed-race person. It made their children Misklinge as well. The immediate consequences were bureaucratic rather than dramatic. Clara lost her position as a seamstress at a department store. The children were transferred to a different school. Friedrich faced no employment consequences. Civil engineering wasn't a politically sensitive field, but he began receiving subtle pressure to divorce Clara. His supervisor suggested, carefully, that it would be advantageous for career advancement. Friedrich's response to this pressure revealed the core of his character. He did nothing. He didn't join the Nazi Party despite gentle encouragement. He didn't divorce Clara despite the professional benefits. But he also didn't resist or speak out. He simply continued his work, kept his head down, and tried to protect his family through insignificance. This strategy of passive survival might have worked indefinitely in peacetime. But Germany wasn't remaining at peace. In 1936, military conscription was reintroduced. Friedrich received his notice in March 1937 at age 26. His engineering background marked him for specialized training. After basic infantry instruction at a camp near Derberitz, he was assigned to the Engineer Corps with a focus on fortification construction. He possessed exactly the skills the expanding Wehrmacht needed: technical competence, administrative precision, and no political opinions that would complicate deployment. He proved to be a capable soldier in the way that unexceptional men often do, by being reliable. He followed orders exactly. He completed paperwork on time. He didn't drink excessively or gamble away his pay. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, Feldwebel Friedrich Becker was with a construction battalion building pontoon bridges across the Vistula River. When France fell in June 1940, Oberfeldwebel Becker was supervising bunker construction along the Atlantic Wall. His superiors appreciated him for what he was: a competent administrator who could translate engineering specifications into functioning military infrastructure. In December 1940, he was promoted to lieutenant and assigned to a staff position coordinating supply logistics for engineer units. 3 months later, in March 1941, he received a second promotion to Hauptmann and a new assignment: Infantry Regiment 427, 129. Infantry Division, preparing for operations in the East. This was an unusual assignment. Infantry regiment staff positions typically went to combat officers, not engineer specialists, but the 129 Infantry Division was a newly formed unit, assembled from reservists and transferred personnel, designated for occupation duties rather than frontline combat. It needed officers who could handle administrative complexity, requisitions, billeting, construction coordination. Friedrich Becker's personnel file showed years of exactly this kind of work. On June 22, 1941, Operation Barbarossa began. The 129 Infantry Division crossed into Soviet territory as part of Army Group Center's second wave, following behind the spearhead units. Friedrich's role was logistical, ensuring that forward positions received engineering supplies, coordinating repair of damaged infrastructure, managing construction of field fortifications. For the first month, it seemed like the Wehrmacht's propaganda wasn't entirely wrong. The advance was rapid. Soviet forces appeared disorganized. Friedrich's regiment moved from Brest-Litovsk toward Minsk, then east toward Smolensk. His duties kept him away from the worst of the fighting. He was typically positioned 3 to 5 kilometers behind the front line, coordinating supply columns. But Friedrich saw things during those weeks that his journal suggests deeply disturbed him. He witnessed the activities of Einsatzgruppen units, SS paramilitary death squads that followed behind the Wehrmacht, systematically executing Jewish civilians, communist officials, and other undesirables. He observed the casual brutality with which some units treated Soviet prisoners. He saw villages burned for harboring partisans, with no clear evidence that partisans had been present. Most significantly, he learned what was planned for occupied Soviet territories. In mid-July 1941, Friedrich attended a briefing where Wehrmacht officers discussed implementation of the Hunger Plan, a strategy to deliberately starve tens of millions of Soviet civilians to death to secure food supplies for German forces and the Reich. The plan was presented as logistical necessity, not genocide, but Friedrich understood exactly what it meant. His journal entry from July 18, 1941, "They speak of millions dying as though discussing crop yields. I thought we were fighting a war. This is something else entirely." For a man who had spent his entire life avoiding political engagement, Friedrich now faced an unavoidable moral crisis. He was part of a military machine conducting genocide. His engineering expertise, his administrative competence, all the skills that had provided him comfortable employment, were now facilitating mass murder. But what finally pushed Friedrich toward desertion wasn't abstract moral horror. It was personal catastrophe. On July 27, 1941, he received a letter from his sister in Flensburg, dated June 30th, but delayed in military mail. Clara and the children had been living with Friedrich's parents in Flensburg while he served in the East. The letter contained news that shattered what remained of his commitment to Germany's war effort. On the night of June 24, 1941, 2 days into Operation Barbarossa, British bombers had struck targets in Flensburg. The bombing wasn't heavy, only minor damage to the harbor facilities. But one bomb had fallen short of its intended target and struck a residential block in the Nordstadt district. Clara Becker, age 29, was killed instantly. Else, age 7, died of injuries 3 hours later at the hospital. Wilhelm, age 5, survived the initial blast but died 2 days later from internal bleeding. Friedrich's parents survived because they'd been in the cellar. Clara and the children had been sleeping on the upper floor because Wilhelm was afraid of the dark cellar. The letter was matter-of-fact in its German way. His sister apologized for the delay in notification. She provided details of the funeral, which had occurred on June 28th. She mentioned that his father was handling the paperwork. She noted that Clara had asked to be buried in the Lutheran cemetery despite her Jewish ancestry, and the local officials had allowed it given the circumstances. Friedrich received this letter in a forward supply depot 12 kilometers east of Smolensk. The Wehrmacht was advancing so rapidly that mail was arriving in batches, weeks delayed. His family had been dead for nearly a month before he learned of their fate. His immediate superior, Hauptmann Werner Stahl, noted in his report that Becker requested compassionate leave, but was denied because the operational situation didn't permit officer absences. Regulations technically entitled him to emergency furlough, but the regiment was short of experienced staff officers. Friedrich was told he could apply for leave in September, once the summer offensive concluded. September, 3 months to grieve, 3 months to continue coordinating the logistics of an invasion he now viewed as having murdered his family, not directly, but through a war of conquest that had brought British bombers over Flensburg. What happened next, according to the journal found in the bunker, was that Friedrich Wilhelm Becker made a decision that would have resulted in his execution if discovered. He decided to disappear. July 29, 1941. Forward Supply Depot, Sector K-17, approximately 18 kilometers east of Smolensk. Friedrich Becker sits in a requisitioned farmhouse that serves as his regimental headquarters, unable to sleep for the third consecutive night. The letter from his sister rests on the wooden table before him, read so many times that the ink is beginning to smudge from the oils of his fingers. Outside, he can hear the rumble of artillery. The Germans are pressing toward Yelnya, the Soviets counterattacking with increasing desperation. In his journal he writes, "There is nothing left to return to. Even if I survive this war, what remains? An empty apartment in Hamburg, a grave in Flensburg, a Germany that has become something monstrous. I owe this regime nothing. It has taken everything." But desertion isn't simple for a Wehrmacht captain. It's not like a private slipping away from a guard post. Friedrich has responsibilities, subordinates, visibility. His absence would be noted within hours. The penalty for desertion is death, typically by firing squad, occasionally by hanging if the Wehrmacht wants to make an example. Even in the chaos of the Eastern Front, military discipline is ruthlessly maintained. Yet Friedrich possesses advantages that most potential deserters lack. He understands logistics. He knows how supplies move, how paperwork flows, how the administrative machinery of the Wehrmacht functions. And crucially, his position gives him access to resources most soldiers never see. Over the next 9 days, Friedrich executes the preliminary phases of what his journal calls Operation Lazarus, a resurrection from the dead. Phase 1, establishing the refuge. Between July 30th and August 3rd, Friedrich diverts supplies during the chaos of the Smolensk operation. A Wehrmacht captain ordering materials doesn't attract scrutiny. It's literally his job. He requisitions materials for forward observation post-construction and has them delivered to a supply dump near Gierlas, back in occupied Poland, nearly 600 kilometers from his current position. The supplies include 80 bags of cement, steel reinforcement bars, lumber, a portable generator, a water filtration system, 2 months' worth of preserved rations and medical supplies. On paper, these materials are designated for strengthening defensive positions around Wolf's Lair. In reality, Friedrich has been systematically routing them to a trusted contact, Obergefreiter Klaus Richter, a supply sergeant who served with Friedrich during the France campaign. Richter, in exchange for payment in Reichsmarks that Friedrich has been saving, oversees construction of the bunker outside Gierlas. The location is deliberate, close enough to Wolf's Lair that unauthorized construction blends into the background of constant building activity, but far enough that it won't be incorporated into the official defensive perimeter. The bunker is dug into a hillside, camouflaged with earth and pine branches, with a concealed entrance that resembles a natural depression. Richter believes he's building a private survival shelter for a paranoid officer who thinks the Wehrmacht might collapse. He's paid enough not to ask questions. The work is completed by August 8th. Phase 2, the false identity. On August 9th, Friedrich travels to Königsberg, modern-day Kaliningrad, on legitimate business, coordinating engineer supplies with a depot there. During this trip, he visits a civilian printing shop operated by a man named Heinrich Volkmann, a printer who, according to contacts Friedrich has carefully cultivated, produces forged documents for black market profiteers. Friedrich orders a complete set of civilian identity papers in the name of Martin Eichmann, born in Hamburg, occupation, civil engineer, exempt from military service due to essential civilian work. The backstory is simple enough to be believable. Eichmann works for a construction firm that has contracts with the Wehrmacht. He travels frequently to occupied territories overseeing building projects. The papers cost Friedrich 800 Reichsmarks, nearly 6 months of a captain's salary. He's been saving since 1939, paranoid even before his family's death that Germany's war might end badly. Volkmann promises delivery within 2 weeks. The documents will be sent to a postal drop in Allenstein, modern-day Olsztyn, Poland, where Friedrich can collect them. Phase 3, creating the death. This is the most complex phase. Friedrich needs to die, officially, without leaving a body that could disprove his death. He studies his regiment's casualty reporting procedures he himself helped establish. When a soldier is killed, his death is reported up the chain of command with documentation, witness statements, location of death, disposition of remains. But in the chaos of heavy combat, especially when units are overrun or retreat hastily, the documentation becomes impressionistic. Killed in action during Soviet counterattack can cover a multitude of uncertainties. Friedrich identifies his opportunity, the Battle of Yelnya. By late August 1941, the German advance has created a vulnerable salient around the town of Yelnya, 80 kilometers southeast of Smolensk. Soviet forces are concentrating for a counteroffensive. The Wehrmacht High Command orders the salient abandoned, but not before it's used as a launching point for the push toward Moscow. The fighting is intense, confused, with multiple units repositioning under fire. Friedrich's regiment, the 427th Infantry, is positioned on the salient's northern edge, tasked with maintaining supply lines during the withdrawal. On August 29th, Friedrich volunteers to personally supervise supply convoy security during a particularly dangerous resupply run, a task normally delegated to junior officers. His commander, impressed by his dedication, approves. August 30th, 1941, 14:20 hours. Friedrich leads a convoy of 6 trucks toward a forward position near Yelnya. The convoy includes 12 soldiers from his regiment's supply company. They're transporting ammunition and rations to units preparing to withdraw. At 15:20 hours, approximately 4 kilometers from their destination, the convoy encounters a Soviet artillery barrage. This isn't unusual. Soviet gunners have been shelling German positions constantly. What happens next, according to the official report filed on September 2nd, is that the lead truck takes a direct hit. The truck explodes, igniting the ammunition it's carrying. The explosion triggers secondary explosions in the following vehicles. Official casualties: 3 soldiers killed instantly, 4 wounded, 6 missing and presumed dead, including Hauptmann Friedrich Becker. The surviving soldiers report that Hauptmann Becker was in the lead truck when it was destroyed. No remains were recovered. The explosion was too intense, and Soviet forces overran the position before the dead could be collected. But Friedrich's journal tells a different story. The convoy was indeed shelled, a truck was indeed destroyed, but Friedrich wasn't in it. At 15:15 hours, 5 minutes before the barrage, Friedrich ordered the convoy to halt for a maintenance check. While the drivers inspected their vehicles, Friedrich walked into the tree line, ostensibly to relieve himself. At 15:19 hours, he was 40 meters from the road when the Soviet shells began falling. The timing was deliberate. Friedrich had observed Soviet artillery patterns for weeks. The Soviets shelled German supply routes at predictable intervals, mid-afternoon, when convoys were most likely to be moving. He'd positioned his convoy in an area he knew was frequently targeted. The artillery did its work. The lead truck, driven by a soldier named Paul Krebs, age 19, from Hanover, was obliterated. 3 other soldiers died in the chaos that followed. Friedrich, watching from the forest, saw the survivors scatter, saw the smoke and fire, saw the tactical situation deteriorating exactly as he'd calculated. He didn't help the wounded. He didn't attempt to restore order. He walked deeper into the forest and kept walking. August 30th, 1941, 16:01:945 hours. Friedrich moves southwest through forests, still bearing scars from Napoleon's 1812 campaign. He's wearing his Wehrmacht uniform. Abandoning it now would be suicidal if he encounters German patrols. He carries a military backpack containing civilian clothes, a Walther P-38 pistol with 3 magazines, a map, a compass, his forged papers, collected from the Allenstein postal drop 2 days earlier, and 1,200 Reichsmarks. He walks 23 kilometers that first day, navigating by compass, avoiding roads. His journal: every time I hear engines, I expect to be discovered, but the front is chaos. No one is looking for a single officer walking away from disaster. That night he sleeps in an abandoned barn. The Wehrmacht's advance has created vast stretches of depopulated countryside, villages emptied, populations fled or murdered. The landscape is full of hiding places. August 31st, 1941, 6:32:130 hours. Friedrich continues west, now angling northwest toward Poland. He's covering approximately 30 kilometers per day, walking speed that won't attract attention if he's spotted, but fast enough to put distance between himself and the battle zone. He travels through forests whenever possible, using tree lines as concealment. At 13:40 hours, he encounters a problem: a Wehrmacht checkpoint on the main road between Smolensk and Minsk. He observes it from a distance, soldiers checking papers of civilian refugees and military traffic. He can't risk using the road while in uniform. He circles north, adding 8 kilometers to his route, and crosses the road after dark where no checkpoint exists. September 1st, 1941. Friedrich is now 110 kilometers from the site of his death. He's entered territory that was occupied by Germany in the first weeks of Barbarossa, now rear area, relatively pacified. Here, he makes his first transformation. In a forest clearing, he buries his Wehrmacht uniform. He changes into civilian clothes, a worn suit, white shirt, no tie, work boots. He transfers his papers and money to a leather briefcase he'd stashed in his backpack. He becomes Martin Eichmann, civil engineer. The transformation isn't just clothing. Friedrich has been mentally rehearsing his cover story for weeks. Martin Eichmann works for TOT Organization, the civil engineering group building infrastructure for the Wehrmacht. He's traveling from a construction site in Minsk back to his headquarters in Warsaw. He has all the correct papers. Volkmann did excellent work. September 4th, 1941. Friedrich reaches Baranavachi, modern-day Belarus, a railway junction occupied by German forces. Here, he takes his first major risk. He boards a train to Warsaw using his false papers. The checkpoint at the Baranavachi station is perfunctory. A Feldgendarmerie, military police, sergeant glances at Friedrich's papers, notes the TOT Organization stamp, waves him through. The sergeant is more concerned with checking Soviet civilians for partisan connections than scrutinizing a German engineer traveling on official business. The train journey takes 18 hours, with multiple delays for military traffic. Friedrich sits in a second-class compartment with 3 other civilians, a Wehrmacht quartermaster heading to Warsaw on leave, a Polish collaborator courier, and a nurse working for the German Red Cross. They make small talk. Friedrich's story holds up under casual conversation. No one questions his presence. September 5th, 1941, 18:20 hours, Warsaw. Friedrich exits the train in a city transformed by occupation. Warsaw in September 1941 is a study in layers of control: the German district, the Polish district, and the sealed Jewish ghetto. Friedrich navigates to a boarding house in the Praga district, east of the Vistula River, where his false papers identify him as having a week of authorized stay. He remains in Warsaw for 3 days, deliberately visible, establishing his false identity. He eats at restaurants where he's seen. He registers his presence with the local Ortskommandanter, area command, as regulations require. He sends a telegram to a fake TOT Organization office, a postal drop he's arranged, reporting his arrival. He's creating a paper trail for Martin On September 8th, he takes another train, this time to Poznan. Then, on September 10th, a third train to Allenstein. Each journey reinforces his cover. Each checkpoint he passes increases his confidence. September 12, 1941. Friedrich arrives in Gierlaus, just 8 kilometers from Wolf's lair. He hikes to his bunker using back paths, arriving after dark. Obergefreiter Richter has done excellent work. The bunker is invisible unless you know exactly where to look. Friedrich descends into his refuge. It's crude but functional, 12 meters long, 3 meters wide, 2 meters high. Richter has installed wooden walls, a ventilation system that vents through concealed pipes, a chemical toilet, storage shelves stocked with rations, a folding bed, a small desk, and battery-powered lighting. This is where Friedrich Wilhelm Becker plans to wait out the winter. According to his journal, his plan is to remain hidden until spring 1942, when he'll continue south through Slovakia and Hungary toward neutral Switzerland. He has maps, contacts, and money. He's patient. He can wait. But the plan has a critical flaw he hasn't fully considered. Winter in northeastern Poland, even in a bunker, is a death sentence without constant supply. March 22, 2024. Institute of National Remembrance Field Office, Warsaw. Dr. Anna Wojciechowska sits in a conference room with materials spread across 3 tables, trying to make sense of what her team has extracted from the Gierlaus bunker. The skeleton, the documents, the journal. Each piece of evidence adds detail to a story that shouldn't exist according to official records. The official Wehrmacht casualty list is clear, she tells her research assistant, Thomas Kowalski, no relation to the excavator operator. Hauptmann Friedrich Wilhelm Becker, service number 84312K28, killed in action September 2, 1941, near Yelnya. Listed among 63 casualties from Infantry Regiment 427, body never recovered. But he died here, Thomas replies, gesturing at the skeletal analysis report. Carbon-14 dating puts death between December 1941 and March 1942, almost certainly winter 1940-142 based on the narrow confidence interval. The contradiction is stark. Official records place Becker's death 4 months earlier and 600 kilometers away from where his actual remains were found. Dr. Wojciechowska initiates the formal investigation with 3 parallel tracks: forensic verification, document authentication, and historical reconstruction. The Central Forensic Laboratory of the Polish police begins intensive analysis of the skeletal remains on March 24, 2024. The process is methodical and exhaustive. Dental comparison. Friedrich's military medical records, requested from the Bundesarchiv Military Archive in Freiburg, Germany, include dental charts from examinations in 1937, 1939, and 1940. The Wehrmacht was meticulous about medical documentation. Dr. Helena Mazur, forensic odontologist, compares the archival charts with the skeleton's dental structure. The results, delivered on April 2, 2024, show 14 points of concordance. The skeleton has the same distinctive malocclusion, a slight overbite noted in the 1937 chart. A filled cavity in the upper right second molar matches exactly. Most tellingly, the skeleton is missing the lower left third molar, extracted in 1939 according to medical records. The probability that this is Friedrich Wilhelm Becker, 94.3%. DNA analysis. This is more complicated. DNA degradation after 80+ years is significant, but the bunker's sealed environment preserved tissue remnants in the bone marrow. The lab extracts mitochondrial DNA, more stable than nuclear DNA, from the femur. The challenge is finding comparison samples. Friedrich's children died in 1941. His wife died in 1941. His parents are long deceased, but genealogical research conducted through German parish records and civil registries identifies a living descendant, Margarethe Becker-Lindström, age 67, of Malmö, Sweden, granddaughter of Friedrich's older brother. Ms. Becker Lindström agrees to provide a DNA sample. The comparison, completed on April 18, 2024, shows mitochondrial DNA concordance consistent with familial relationship. It's not absolute proof. Mitochondrial DNA is inherited through the maternal line, so it confirms Friedrich's maternal lineage, not specifically Friedrich, but combined with the dental evidence, it's conclusive. Injury analysis. The skeleton shows evidence of a healed fracture of the left radius, consistent with an injury documented in Friedrich's military medical file from July 1938, when he broke his arm during training exercises at Derberitz. The fracture pattern and healing progression match the medical description exactly. Cause of death. This is where forensics becomes grim speculation. The skeleton shows no evidence of trauma, no gunshot wounds, no fractures consistent with violence. Dr. Wojciechowska's team considers several hypotheses. Carbon monoxide poisoning from the bunker's heating system. Hypothermia if the heating system failed. Starvation after supplies ran out. Disease or infection without medical treatment. Suicide, though no evidence of the method remains. The bunker's interior offers clues. The heating system, a small wood-burning stove with the chimney venting through concealed pipes, shows evidence of having been heavily used. Charcoal residue indicates extended burning, but there's no evidence of malfunction that would have caused carbon monoxide buildup. More tellingly, the ration supplies found in the bunker are completely exhausted. Empty tin cans scraped clean. No preserved food remains. The water filtration system's reservoir is dry. The skeletal analysis shows signs of malnutrition in the final weeks of life. Bone density changes, consistent with severe caloric deficit. Dr. Wojciechowska's preliminary conclusion. Friedrich Becker died of starvation and hypothermia in the brutal winter of 1940-142, trapped in his bunker when supplies ran out, and he either couldn't or wouldn't risk exposure to resupply. While forensics establishes who died in the bunker, document analysis reveals why he was there. The forged papers. The civilian Kenkart identifying Martin Eichmann is examined by Christoph Nowak, a specialist in World War II-era documentation. The card is a sophisticated forgery. The paper stock is correct for 1941-era German documents. The stamps and seals are accurate reproductions of genuine Tat organization credentials. The photograph shows Friedrich. Comparing it with his official Wehrmacht photo reveals the same person, though he's wearing civilian clothes. Nowak contacts the Federal Archives in Germany, which maintains records of Tat organization personnel. There was no Martin Eichmann working for any Tat organization unit in 1941. The credential number is false, inserted into a gap in the authentic numbering sequence, a forger's trick to avoid immediate detection. But the quality of the forgery reveals something important. This was produced by someone with access to genuine documents and professional printing equipment. This wasn't amateur work. Someone in occupied Poland was running a sophisticated forgery operation. Nowak's investigation identifies a likely candidate, Heinrich Volkmann, a printer in Königsberg who was arrested by the Gestapo in November 1942 for producing false papers. Gestapo interrogation records, discovered in Soviet archives after the Cold War and now digitized, mention that Volkmann had been operating since early 1941, providing documents to deserters, black marketeers, and Jews attempting to pass as Aryans. He was executed in February 1943. The journal. This is the investigation's most valuable evidence. Friedrich's journal is 127 handwritten pages, dated entries from July 29, 1941 to February 8, 1942. Handwriting analysis, conducted by comparing the journal script to Friedrich's signatures on requisition forms from his military service, shows a 97% probability that the same person wrote both. The handwriting is consistent, methodical, precise, engineer's lettering. But more than authentication, the journal provides detailed documentation of Friedrich's desertion. It names Obergefreiter Klaus Richter as the bunker's builder. It describes Heinrich Volkmann's forgery services. It outlines the fake artillery attack that covered Friedrich's disappearance. It lists travel routes, checkpoint experiences, and the aliases he used. Most poignantly, it records his psychological deterioration during the winter isolation. Entry from December 18, 1941. The cold is beyond what I imagined. Even with the stove burning constantly, the bunker temperature rarely rises above freezing. I wear every piece of clothing I brought. I sleep in 4-hour cycles because the cold wakes me. I'm burning through firewood faster than planned. Entry from January 4, 1942. Supplies are running low. I rationed carefully, but I miscalculated how many calories I'd need just to stay warm. I'm eating once per day now, small portions. I'm losing weight. My hands shake from cold and hunger. Entry from January 28, 1942. I tried to leave yesterday, made it 400 meters before the cold drove me back. The temperature is so far below zero that breathing hurts. My feet went numb in 15 minutes. The bunker is a trap, but outside is death. Final entry, February 8, 1942. I don't have the strength to write much. No food left for 3 days. Water is from melted snow. I keep thinking about Clara and the children. Maybe I'm joining them. I failed at living. Perhaps I'll succeed at dying. If anyone finds this, tell my brother in Flensburg that I tried. The handwriting in this final entry is shaky, degraded. Friedrich was dying as he wrote. Dr. Watts, Chauska's team works to verify Friedrich's account through independent historical records. The artillery attack, Soviet military archives, access through cooperation with Russian historians, confirmed that Soviet artillery units were shelling German positions near Yelnya on August 30, 1941. German Wehrmacht records confirm that a supply convoy from Infantry Regiment 427 was destroyed that day, with casualties matching the official report. Friedrich's account appears accurate. There was a real attack that killed real soldiers, which he exploited to fake his own death. The investigation identifies one of the convoy casualties, Paul Krebs, age 19, from Hanover, who drove the lead truck. His family received notification of his death on September 10, 1941. Paul was an only child. His parents received a military pension and a letter from Paul's commanding officer describing him as a brave soldier who gave his life for the fatherland. Friedrich never mentions Paul Krebs in his journal, though he must have known the young man's death would provide cover for his desertion. Klaus Richter. Wehrmacht personnel records confirm that Obergefreiter Klaus Richter served in supply logistics in Poland from June 1941 through December 1943, when his unit was transferred to Italy. Post-war records show Richter survived the war, returned to Germany, and worked as a warehouse manager in Kiel until his death in 1979. He never spoke publicly about building a secret bunker, likely because doing so would have exposed him to prosecution for aiding a deserter. The investigation contacts Richter's son, Manfred Richter, now 81, living in Hamburg. After initial reluctance, Manfred reveals that his father mentioned doing a construction job for a nervous officer near Wolf's Lair, but never provided details. Klaus Richter apparently kept the secret for 38 years after the war ended. Travel records. German occupation authorities in Poland maintained meticulous records of civilian movement. Researchers search archives in Minsk, Warsaw, and Poznan for records of Martin Eichmann traveling in September 1941. They find 3 documents: a boarding house registration in Warsaw dated September 5, 1941, a a rail travel permit from Warsaw to Poznan dated September 8th, and an Ortskommandantur registration in Allenstein dated September 11th. The dates align perfectly with Friedrich's journal entries. Each document bears the signature M. Eichmann and lists occupation as civil engineer, Tot organization. The signatures are in Friedrich's handwriting. The missing network. Friedrich's journal mentions planning to use an escape route through Slovakia, Hungary, and into Switzerland. He references contacts in Bratislava and arrangements in Budapest, but doesn't name names, perhaps paranoid that the journal might be discovered. This suggests Friedrich was aware of, or part of, a larger deserter network. Historical research into Wehrmacht desertion reveals that such networks did exist. The Wehrmacht officially executed approximately 22,000 German soldiers for desertion during World War II, but estimates suggest that tens of thousands more successfully deserted and were never caught. Some used organized escape routes similar to what Friedrich planned: safe houses, forged papers, bribed officials, smuggling into neutral countries. Dr. Wojciechowska contacts Professor Heinrich Müller at the University of Freiburg, a specialist in Wehrmacht desertion. Professor Müller notes that Friedrich's plan, faking death in combat, using forged civilian credentials, hiding in occupied territory before moving to neutral country, matches the pattern of successful escapes documented in other cases. What's unusual, Professor Müller observes, is that Becker had the resources and planning ability to execute the initial phases so well. Most deserters were desperate soldiers fleeing impulsively. Becker was methodical. If he hadn't miscalculated the winter survival requirements, he might have made it. On May 3, 2024, Dr. Wojciechowska travels to Malmö, Sweden, to meet with Margarethe Becker-Lindström, Friedrich's grandniece who provided the DNA sample. Margarethe is a retired teacher, soft-spoken, living in a small apartment filled with family photographs. She has a framed portrait of her grandfather, Friedrich's older brother, in Wehrmacht uniform. He survived the war, returned to Flensburg, and died in 1963. "My grandfather never spoke of Friedrich after the war," Margarethe says. "I only learned I had a great-uncle who died on the Eastern Front when I was researching family history in the 1990s. Even then, there was very little information. No details beyond killed in action, 1941. Dr. Wojciechowska shows her the journal, translated into Swedish. Margarethe reads it in silence, occasionally wiping her eyes. "He deserted," she says finally. "That's what this is, he ran away." "He lost his entire family," Dr. Wojciechowska replies carefully. "His wife, his 2 children killed in a bombing raid, the letter he received." "I understand," Margarethe interrupts. "I'm not judging him. God knows what any of us would do in those circumstances, but he let those soldiers die in that convoy. He used their deaths to fake his own. That boy, the driver, 19 years old. Friedrich walked away and left him burning." It's the moral complexity that will dominate public reaction once the story is published. Friedrich Becker was a victim, his family murdered by war, and a deserter who exploited the deaths of his own soldiers. He was escaping genocide and abandoning his duty. He was human in all the contradictory ways that war exposes. Margarethe agrees to allow publication of the findings. "People should know the truth," she says, "all of it, the good and the bad." The discovery of Friedrich's bunker opens a door to a broader historical question. Was he alone, or was he part of something larger? Dr. Wojciechowska's investigation, expanding through spring and summer 2024, uncovers evidence that Friedrich was connected to an extensive network of deserters, resistors, and opportunists operating across occupied Europe between 1941 and 1945. The forger Heinrich Volkmann, executed in 1943, left behind a trail that researchers can follow. Gestapo interrogation records, captured by Soviet forces in 1945 and now housed in the Russian State Military Archive, provide names, dates, and operational details. Between March 1941 and his arrest in November 1942, Volkmann produced false identity documents for at least 247 individuals. The Gestapo's list includes 89 Wehrmacht deserters, 63 Jewish Germans and Poles attempting to pass as Aryans, 42 Polish resistance members, 31 Soviet prisoners of war who'd escaped from labor camps, 22 individuals whose motives are listed as black market operations. Volkmann wasn't working alone. His operation included 3 accomplices: a photographer who produced false credential photos, a postal clerk who intercepted and provided stolen travel permits, and a Wehrmacht quartermaster who supplied authentic paper stock and official stamps. The network's scope was remarkable. Volkmann's forgeries weren't crude amateur work. They were virtually indistinguishable from authentic documents because they were created using stolen authentic materials. The postal clerk, Gerhard Bruhl, stole blank credential forms during his shifts at the Königsberg, Maine post office. The quartermaster, Lieutenant Otto Krebs, diverted official Wehrmacht stamp sets meant for field administration offices. Friedrich's journal mentions paying 800 Reichsmarks for his false papers, a substantial sum. Researchers estimate that Volkmann's operation generated between 150,000 and 200,000 Reichsmarks between 1941 and 1942, equivalent to approximately 500,000 euros in modern currency. The operation was as much criminal enterprise as humanitarian aid. The Gestapo shut down Volkmann's network in a single coordinated raid on November 17, 1942. All 4 men were arrested simultaneously. They were interrogated, tortured, and executed. The Gestapo recovered forging equipment and a partial client list, but not the complete records. Volkmann appears to have destroyed most documentation before his arrest. The Gestapo never discovered that one of Volkmann's clients was hiding in a bunker 8 kilometers from Hitler's Wolf's Lair headquarters. Friedrich Becker's name doesn't appear in the recovered Gestapo files. Friedrich's journal references contacts in Bratislava and planned escape through Slovakia and Hungary towards Switzerland. This route was no fantasy. It was part of a documented escape corridor used by Wehrmacht deserters, concentration camp escapees, and Allied airmen shot down over occupied Europe. Research by Professor Müller at Freiburg identifies what historians call the Donauweg, the Danube route, a smuggling network that moved people from occupied Eastern Europe through Hungary and Yugoslavia toward neutral countries or Allied territory. The route operated through a loose network of anti-Nazi sympathizers, black market operators, religious organizations, and opportunists motivated by payment. Key waypoints included Bratislava, Slovakia. A Lutheran pastor named John Svetlik operated a safe house in the city's Old Town district, sheltering deserters and refugees before moving them south toward Hungary. Post-war testimony from survivors reveals that Svetlik's network assisted approximately 130 people between 1941 and 1944, when he was arrested by the SS. He survived the war and died in 1967. Before his death, he provided interviews documenting the network's operations. Budapest, Hungary. Multiple safe houses operated by Jewish resistance organizations, Christian relief workers, and Hungarian military officers opposed to the German alliance. Budapest was particularly important because Hungary, though allied with Germany, maintained more independence than other occupied territories until the German occupation in March 1944. Between 1941 and 1944, Budapest was a crucial transit point where deserters could obtain new documents and rest before continuing south. Yugoslavia. The route fragmented here depending on the year. Early in the war, it was possible to move through Yugoslavia toward Greece and neutral Turkey. After the German invasion of Yugoslavia in April 1941, the route became more dangerous, but partisan-controlled territories in Bosnia and Serbia provided passage for those with connections. Switzerland, the ultimate destination for many deserters. Swiss border guards were officially instructed to turn back military deserters, but in practice, enforcement varied. Between 1939 and 1945, approximately 21,000 Allied soldiers and an estimated 4,600 Axis deserters successfully crossed into Switzerland and were interned there for the war's duration. Friedrich's plan to follow this route was ambitious but feasible. Others succeeded. The critical requirement was money, bribes, payment for false papers, payment for smugglers, and Friedrich had saved enough for the attempt. But the Donnerweg required something Friedrich no longer had by winter 1941, the physical capability to travel. Trapped in his bunker by cold and starvation, he never reached Bratislava. Researchers identify 3 other Wehrmacht soldiers who successfully used the Donnerweg after deserting from the Eastern Front. Lieutenant Hans Kruger, 26, deserted near Leningrad in November 1941. He made his way to Bratislava by February 1942, reached Budapest in April, and crossed into Switzerland in June 1942. He was interned at a camp near Bern for the war's duration. After the war, he was repatriated to Germany, where he faced court-martial proceedings, but was ultimately not prosecuted given post-war legal reforms. He lived in Stuttgart until his death in 1998. Before dying, he gave an interview to a historian documenting his desertion, stating, "I saw what we were doing to civilians in Russia. I couldn't continue being part of it. I chose cowardice over genocide, and I don't regret it." Jeffrader Anton Weber, 22, deserted from a supply unit in Poland in March 1942. He followed essentially the same route Friedrich had planned, reaching Switzerland by August 1942. He remained in Switzerland after the war, married a Swiss woman, and died in Zurich in 2003. His story was documented in a 2005 book about Wehrmacht deserters. Hauptmann Ernst Lehmann, 34, deserted from Army Group South in Ukraine in July 1942 after being ordered to oversee executions of partisan suspects. He reached Hungary but was captured by Hungarian police in September 1942, turned over to German authorities, court-martialed, and executed by firing squad in October 1942. His case file remains in the Bundesarchiv. These 3 cases, one successful escape, one partially successful escape with later prosecution, one failed escape resulting in execution, illustrate the range of outcomes for deserters. Friedrich's death in his bunker represents a 4th outcome, escape attempt that failed before reaching the evacuation route. The number of deserters who successfully escaped and were never documented remains unknown. The Wehrmacht executed approximately 22,000 deserters during the war, but military historians estimate that between 100,000 and 200,000 German soldiers deserted at some point. The discrepancy suggests that many deserters were never caught or never formally prosecuted. They simply disappeared into the chaos of war, assumed dead in combat, or successfully assumed new identities. Friedrich Wilhelm Becker almost joined their ranks. Desertion required money, and Friedrich's financial preparation reveals careful planning. His journal records that he'd been saving since 1939, paranoid even before the family died that this war would end badly. Wehrmacht captain's salary in 1941, approximately 320 Reichsmarks per month. Friedrich served from March 1937 to August 1941, 53 months. If he saved aggressively, perhaps 30% of his salary, he could have accumulated approximately 5,000 Reichsmarks, roughly equivalent to 15,000 euros in modern currency. The journal records expenditures. Bunker construction labor Klaus Richter, 600 Reichsmarks. Forged identity papers Heinrich Volkmann, 800 Reichsmarks. Supplies and equipment diverted from Wehrmacht stock, 400 Reichsmarks in bribes. Travel expenses and contingency funds, 1,200 Reichsmarks. This left him with approximately 2,000 Reichsmarks for the planned escape to Switzerland, likely sufficient if he traveled economically and avoided extortion. But the financial network extended beyond personal savings. Evidence suggests that deserters sometimes pooled resources or accessed hidden funds stolen from occupied territories. Friedrich's journal mentions no such connections, suggesting he was operating independently rather than as part of an organized desertion network. This independence may have contributed to his failure. Had he been part of a network with established safe houses and resupply capabilities, the bunker wouldn't have become a death trap. The network's existence reveals a complex moral economy. Heinrich Volkmann charged desperate people for documents that could save their lives, profiting from existential fear. But he also risked execution to help Jews escape the Holocaust. His motivations were mixed: profit, principle, perhaps both. Similarly, the Lutheran pastor John Svetlik in Bratislava sheltered deserters, soldiers who were, technically, oath-breakers abandoning their comrades. But many of those deserters were fleeing participation in war crimes. Should Svetlik have turned them away because they'd sworn military oaths to a genocidal regime? Friedrich's case embodies these contradictions. He was escaping complicity in atrocities: the hunger plan, Einsatzgruppen massacres, the wholesale destruction he witnessed in Russia. But his escape exploited the death of Paul Krebs, a 19-year-old who burned alive in a truck while Friedrich watched from the trees. No simple moral calculus resolves these contradictions. The network existed in ethical gray space, where survival, profit, principle, and pragmatism intersected without clear boundaries. February 9, 1942, Gierla's bunker, Poland. Friedrich Wilhelm Becker stops breathing sometime during the night. His body remains seated at the small wooden desk, slumped forward, head resting on his crossed arms. The journal lies open to his final entry. The bunker's temperature is approximately degrees C. Outside, the winter that killed him continues for 6 more weeks. No one discovers his death. No one is looking for him. According to official records, Friedrich died 6 months earlier, hundreds of kilometers away. His body remains in the bunker through the spring thaw of 1942, through the summer, through another winter. The bunker's sealed environment prevents rapid decomposition. Scavengers can't reach him. The forest above shows no sign of the chamber below. The forensic investigation in 2024 reconstructs Friedrich's final days through material evidence found in the bunker. The rations. The bunker contained 47 empty tin cans, scraped completely clean. The cans originally contained preserved vegetables, meat, beans, and condensed milk, standard Wehrmacht long-term storage food. Calculating from the number of cans and typical serving sizes, Friedrich had approximately 60 days of rations when he entered the bunker in mid-September 1941. 60 days should have taken him through mid-November, but his journal indicates he began severe rationing in early December, suggesting his supplies lasted longer than standard serving sizes would indicate, meaning he was under-reading from the start. The firewood. The bunker contained a wood-burning stove for heat. Charcoal residue analysis by the Institute of National Remembrance indicates Friedrich burned approximately 380 kilograms of wood during his time in the bunker, at a burn rate of approximately 3-4 kilograms per day to maintain minimally survivable temperature. This suggests 95–127 days of heating. This timeline aligns with his death in early February, approximately 145 days after he entered the bunker in mid-September, but with firewood supplies exhausted in the final weeks, meaning He was living in unheated conditions when he died. The journal, Friedrich's entries grow shorter, shakier, and less frequent as winter progresses. Between January 28th and February 8th, 12 days, there are only 2 entries. The handwriting deterioration is dramatic. The February 8th entry is barely legible. Medical experts reviewing the journal's physical deterioration note symptoms consistent with severe malnutrition and hypothermia, tremor affecting handwriting, cognitive decline evidenced by sentence fragmentation, and probable frostbite affecting his writing hand. The skeletal analysis. Friedrich's remains show bone density changes consistent with severe caloric restriction. His skeleton displays evidence of scurvy, vitamin C deficiency, in the form of subperiosteal hemorrhaging that left traces on bone surfaces. This suggests his diet in the final weeks consisted of preserved foods without fresh nutrients. Most tellingly, his body was found seated at the desk, suggesting death came relatively peacefully, perhaps in sleep, perhaps during the mental confusion of terminal hypothermia. He didn't die struggling, he simply stopped. The investigation reveals how Friedrich died, but leaves crucial questions unanswered. His journal indicates he attempted to leave on January 27th, but was driven back by extreme cold after only 400 meters. Temperatures in northeastern Poland during the winter of 1940-140 regularly dropped below degrees C. Without proper cold weather gear, and Friedrich had only his civilian clothes and a Wehrmacht coat, exposure was rapidly fatal. But couldn't he have waited for better weather? Late January gave way to February, typically slightly warmer. Could he have pushed through another few weeks until temperatures moderated? The answer lies in malnutrition. By late January, Friedrich had been severely undereating for weeks. Malnutrition impairs thermoregulation. The body can't generate heat efficiently. A healthy person might have survived a February journey to the nearest village, approximately 8 kilometers. A starving man couldn't. Friedrich likely understood this. His final journal entry suggests acceptance. Perhaps I'll succeed at dying. The bunker was located in forest approximately 8 kilometers from Wolf's Lair, in territory patrolled by Wehrmacht security units. Klaus Richter, who built the bunker, knew its location. Could Richter have checked on Friedrich during the winter? Post-war interviews with Richter's son suggest Richter felt guilty about Friedrich's fate, but was powerless to help. Richter was serving with a supply unit stationed near Minsk during the winter of 1940-140, hundreds of kilometers away. He couldn't visit the bunker without obtaining travel permits that would have raised questions. And by the time Richter's unit rotated back to Poland in April 1942, Friedrich had been dead for 2 months. Friedrich's plan assumed he'd only need the bunker for a few months, until spring, when he'd continue his escape. He didn't anticipate that winter conditions would trap him there permanently. There's no evidence that anyone questioned the official death report. Friedrich's immediate family, his wife and children, were already dead. His parents received notification of his death and accepted it. His brother, serving on the Western Front, had no reason to doubt the report. His fellow officers in Infantry Regiment 427 accepted that he'd been killed in the artillery strike. The chaos of the Eastern Front made mysterious deaths common. An officer killed in an explosion with no recoverable remains was tragic but not suspicious. If anyone suspected desertion, they left no record of it. Friedrich's false identity as Martin Eichmann was good enough to pass multiple checkpoints in September 1941, but once he disappeared into the bunker, he vanished completely. Friedrich's journal contains detailed notes about the planned route through Bratislava, Budapest, and into Switzerland. It lists contact names, though many are coded or abbreviated, presumably for security. Some can be identified through historical research. J.S. in Bratislava, Lutheran connection. Almost certainly John S. Vetlik, the Lutheran pastor who ran a safe house. Svetlik survived the war and documented his activities, confirming that he assisted Wehrmacht deserters. Buta Contact, RH, American Office. This likely refers to a representative of the American Relief Administration or similar humanitarian organization operating in Budapest before the U.S. entered the war. The identity remains unconfirmed. Swiss border, Butch crossing. Avoid Dornbirn. Butch and Dornbirn are both Swiss border towns. This note suggests Friedrich had researched specific crossing points and knew which were more closely monitored. Had Friedrich survived the winter and continued his journey in spring 1942, would he have succeeded? Historical analysis suggests his chances were fair but not certain. The route through Slovakia and Hungary was functional in 1941-42, before Germany occupied Hungary in March 1944. Several deserters successfully used this route. Friedrich had money, forged papers, and detailed planning. His engineering background would have helped him navigate logistical challenges. But the journey was dangerous. Hundreds of deserters were captured and executed. Hungarian authorities sometimes cooperated with German requests for extradition. The Swiss border was unpredictably enforced. Professor Müller estimates, based on documented cases, that deserters attempting the southern route in 1941-42 had approximately a 40–50% success rate. Many who failed were captured and executed. Others simply disappeared, killed by partisans, dying of exposure, or vanishing into the chaotic margins of wartime Europe. Friedrich never got the chance to attempt the journey. He died alone in the dark, 8 kilometers from Hitler's headquarters, a ghost in his own grave. Among the items recovered from the bunker, investigators found something heartbreaking. 3 letters, written but never mailed, addressed to Friedrich's parents in Flensburg. The letters were written in October and November 1941, during the early weeks of Friedrich's time in the bunker. He apparently planned to mail them at some point during his escape, perhaps from Hungary or Switzerland, to let his family know he'd survived. The letters avoid details that could incriminate his parents if intercepted. They're written in carefully vague language. October 12, 1941. Dear Mother and Father, I am alive and unharmed. The reports you received were mistaken. I cannot explain more now, but I am safe and hope to see you after the war ends. Please know that I think of you and Clara and the children every day. Your son, Friedrich. November 3, 1941. Dear Mother and Father, I am still alive. I am in a place where I cannot be reached, but I am safe for now. When the war ends, I will find you. Please do not mourn me. I am sorry for the pain my disappearance causes. Friedrich. November 28, 1941. Dear Mother and Father, I do not know if I will survive what I am attempting, but I needed to try. If these letters reach you, you will know I lived longer than the army reported. Please forgive me for the deception. I could not continue fighting their war. Friedrich. The letters were found sealed in envelopes, stamped, addressed, but never mailed. Friedrich apparently intended to send them from a safe location outside Germany, where their arrival wouldn't endanger his parents or reveal his location. He never reached that safe location. Margarethe Becker Lindström, reading these letters in 2024, weeps. He wanted them to know, she says. Even in hiding, even as a deserter, he wanted his parents to know he loved them. Friedrich's parents died in 1956 and 1958 respectively, never knowing their son survived past September 1941. They were buried in Flensburg next to the small graves of Else and Wilhelm. There is a memorial stone for Friedrich. Killed in action, September 2, 1941. That marks an empty grave. The letters remain in the archives of the Institute of National Remembrance, evidence of a son's undelivered love and a family's incomplete grief. The discovery of Friedrich Wilhelm Becker's bunker in March 2024 forces historians, ethicists, and the public to confront uncomfortable questions about war, duty, morality, and justice. The question seems straightforward but resist simple answers. Friedrich wasn't a member of the SS. He wasn't personally involved in executions or concentration camp administration. His role was logistics, coordinating supplies and infrastructure for Wehrmacht combat units. But those combat units were conducting a war of annihilation. The supplies Friedrich coordinated enabled operations that killed millions of Soviet soldiers and civilians. His administrative competence made the Wehrmacht's Eastern Front operations function more efficiently. Does logistical support for genocide constitute war crimes? International law, even as codified in the Nuremberg trials after the war, struggled with this question. The tribunals focused on individuals with direct command responsibility or personal participation in atrocities. Administrative personnel like Friedrich occupied a gray area, complicit in the machinery of war crimes without direct participation in specific acts. Friedrich's journal suggests he was aware of Wehrmacht atrocities. He witnessed Einsatzgruppen operations. He attended briefings about the Hunger Plan. He knew the war in Russia was criminal. But knowledge isn't the same as participation. And participation under military orders in wartime occupies complex moral territory. Professor Lisa Weber, specialist in Holocaust ethics at Berlin's Humboldt University, argues, Becker was a cog in a genocidal machine. The machine couldn't function without cogs. His guilt isn't personal in the sense of having murdered anyone, but it's structural. He facilitated evil through competent administration. His decision to desert was morally correct, the only moral choice available to him, but it came late, after he'd already contributed to the Wehrmacht's operations for months. Counterview from military historian Colonel, retired James Mitchell, U.S. Army War College. We must be careful about retroactive moral judgments applied to soldiers following lawful military orders in wartime. Becker was a logistics officer, not a combat commander. His duties would be identical in any army. If we condemn every soldier who transported supplies during World War II, we condemn millions. Desertion is a serious crime in any military system, and Becker's escape, exploiting the death of a 19-year-old driver, wasn't morally pure. The debate remains unresolved, perhaps unresolvable. Friedrich was both victim and perpetrator, resistor and deserter, moral actor and oath breaker. No ethical discussion of Friedrich's desertion can avoid Paul Krebs, the 19-year-old driver who died in the artillery strike that provided cover for Friedrich's escape. Did Friedrich murder Paul Krebs? Technically, no. Soviet artillery killed Paul. Friedrich didn't fire the shells. He didn't target the convoy. He simply positioned the convoy in a location he knew was frequently shelled, at a time when shelling was likely, and then stepped away minutes before the attack. Legally, this might constitute reckless endangerment or depraved indifference, knowingly placing someone in mortal danger without direct participation in the killing. Morally, it's damning. Friedrich used Paul's death as cover for desertion. He walked away from the burning truck without attempting rescue. He never mentions Paul in his journal except as a tactical element of his escape plan. Paul Krebs was buried in a mass grave near Yelnya with 62 other soldiers. His parents received a pension and a condolence letter. He has no individual grave marker. His life ended at 19 because Friedrich needed a body count to fake his death. Some commentators argue this single act negates any moral credit Friedrich might receive for refusing to continue serving the Wehrmacht. He was willing to let an innocent young man burn to death to save himself. Others argue that moral calculus in war doesn't work that way. The Soviet artillery would have killed someone. The convoy was a legitimate military target. Friedrich didn't create the danger, he exploited it. And the alternative, Friedrich continuing to serve the Wehrmacht, would have contributed to more deaths through continued logistical support for the Eastern Front. The ethical question remains: can desertion be justified if it requires exploiting others' deaths? And if not, what options remain for a soldier who recognizes he's serving a genocidal cause? Between 1941 and 1945, the Wehrmacht, SS, and other German forces murdered approximately 6 million Jews, 3 million Soviet prisoners of war, 2 million Soviet civilians through deliberate starvation and reprisal killings, and hundreds of thousands of Roma, disabled people, political dissidents, and others. After the war, Allied tribunals prosecuted approximately 5,000 individuals for war crimes and crimes against humanity. The vast majority of perpetrators, tens of thousands of people directly involved in murder, hundreds of thousands complicit in various ways, were never prosecuted. Friedrich Wilhelm Becker, had he survived and escaped to Switzerland or South America, would have joined this uncounted multitude. His logistical role in the Wehrmacht's operations would likely never have attracted prosecution. He'd have lived out his life under a false identity, unpunished, unknown. This is what makes his death in the bunker historically significant. It reveals how easily perpetrators could vanish. Dr. Wojciechowska notes, "We found one bunker, one deserter, one carefully planned escape that failed. How many succeeded? How many Friedrich Beckers made it to Buenos Aires or Bern or Beirut? How many lived comfortable lives under false names while their victims' families grieved?" The question haunts Holocaust scholars. Adolf Eichmann was famously captured in Argentina in 1960 and tried in Israel. Joseph Mengele died in Brazil in 1979, never prosecuted. Klaus Barbie was discovered in Bolivia in 1983. But these were high-profile figures. For every famous Nazi war criminal who was eventually caught or identified, dozens of mid-level perpetrators disappeared successfully. Friedrich represents this hidden population, not famous enough to be hunted, competent enough to plan escape, lucky enough initially to execute it. His death in the bunker was accidental justice, punishment by winter and starvation rather than by tribunal and gallows, but it was justice of a sort. Historical research identifies approximately 180 Wehrmacht deserters who successfully escaped to neutral countries during World War II and survived there until death or return to Germany after the war. Their fates varied dramatically. Some, like Lieutenant Hans Kruger mentioned earlier, lived openly after the war, gave interviews, and were celebrated in later decades as moral exemplars who refused to serve a genocidal regime. Others lived in secrecy, never revealing their desertion because post-war Germany initially treated deserters as traitors rather than resistors. It wasn't until 2002 that Germany formally rehabilitated Wehrmacht deserters, acknowledging that desertion from Hitler's military could be morally justified. A few became active resistors after desertion, joining partisan groups or providing intelligence to allies. These individuals transitioned from desertion to active resistance, a moral trajectory that somewhat absolves the initial act of abandoning military duty. But some, an unknown number, were war criminals who deserted to avoid justice, not to resist injustice. They used the same networks, the same forged papers, the same routes as men fleeing consciences. Desertion was morally neutral, motivation mattered. Friedrich's case is complex because his motivations were mixed. He deserted after his family's death, trauma-driven escape, but he also deserted after witnessing atrocities, morally motivated resistance. He was fleeing grief and guilt simultaneously. Germany's post-war reckoning with World War II has been extensive, but memory remains selective. Wehrmacht soldiers are often remembered as just following orders, distinct from SS and Nazi party members who were true believers. This narrative, while containing some truth, obscures the Wehrmacht's deep involvement in war crimes. Friedrich's story complicates this narrative. He was a Wehrmacht officer, part of the system, complicit in its operations, but also a deserter who recognized the regime's evil and tried to escape. He's neither innocent soldier nor dedicated Nazi, but something in between, a participant who became a resistor, too late to claim moral purity. How should such figures be remembered? Margaret Becker Lindstrom struggles with this question. Should I be proud of Friedrich for deserting, or ashamed that he served as long as he did? Should I mourn his death in that bunker, or think he got what he deserved? I don't know. I genuinely don't know. This ambivalence is perhaps the most honest response. Friedrich deserves neither uncomplicated condemnation nor easy forgiveness. He was human, flawed, frightened, complicit, resistant, calculating, grieving. He made choices with fatal consequences for himself and others. The Gierlas bunker, now preserved by the Institute of National Remembrance as an historical site, opened to visitors in October 2024. A small plaque outside the reconstructed entrance reads, "Here died Hauptmann Friedrich Wilhelm Becker, Wehrmacht, February 1942. He deserted from German forces after witnessing war crimes and losing his family to war. He died attempting to escape complicity in genocide. His story reminds us that individual resistance to evil is necessary but insufficient, heroic but costly, and always complicated." Visitors can descend into the bunker's cramped interior. See the desk where Friedrich wrote his final journal entry. Understand the claustrophobic desperation of winter 1940-142. It's not a celebration. It's not a condemnation. It's a memorial to moral complexity, to the reality that war creates situations where every choice is tainted, where survival and ethics conflict, where good people do terrible things and terrible systems contain good people. If the bunker teaches anything, it's that desertion wasn't the answer to the Wehrmacht's crimes. The answer would have been refusing to serve in the first place, or collectively resisting, or military coup against Hitler. Individual desertion saved individuals but didn't stop the genocide. But in the absence of collective resistance, individual desertion was something. Friedrich's attempt to extract himself from complicity was imperfect and self-interested, but it was also recognition of moral truth. He died trying to stop being a perpetrator. That doesn't absolve him of what he'd already done, but it matters. March 2025, 1 year after the discovery. The forest outside Gierlas is green again, pine trees swaying in spring wind. The bunker entrance, carefully reinforced by preservation specialists, is marked with subtle signage directing visitors from a small parking area to the site. Dr. Anna Wojciechowska leads a group of German and Polish historians through the preserved space. They stand in the chamber where Friedrich died, now lit by modern LED strips that make it seem less oppressive than it must have been by candlelight in February 1942. "What strikes me," says one historian, a professor from Warsaw University, "is how close he was to Wolf's lair, 8 kilometers from Hitler's headquarters. Becker was literally hiding under their noses." Dr. Wojciechowska nods. The audacity is remarkable, or the desperation, perhaps both. The bunker has become a minor destination for dark tourism and historical education. School groups visit to learn about Wehrmacht desertion, a topic now included in German curriculum as part of honest reckoning with the Nazi era. Family members of deserters come to see evidence that their relatives' choices were part of a larger pattern. But most visitors come because the story is compelling in the way that human tragedy is always compelling. A man who lost everything, tried to escape, and died alone in the dark. The bunker doesn't offer easy lessons. Friedrich Wilhelm Becker wasn't a hero. He wasn't entirely a villain. He was a man who made choices, some cowardly, some brave, some morally incoherent, in circumstances that reduced human beings to their basest survival instincts. The journal remains the most visited artifact in the Institute's archive. Researchers request access regularly, reading Friedrich's words, tracing his psychological deterioration, analyzing his moral reasoning. The final entry: "If anyone finds this, tell my brother in Flensburg that I tried," has been translated into 11 languages, quoted in 6 books about Wehrmacht desertion, and used in 3 documentary films. "I tried" has become an epitaph not just for Friedrich but for all the resistors, deserters, and halfway heroes of the Nazi era, people who recognized evil, attempted imperfect resistance, and usually failed. Friedrich's brother died in 1963, never knowing his younger sibling survived past September 1941. The message was delivered 82 years late to a grandniece in Sweden, who received it with tears and ambivalence. On a sunny afternoon in May 2025, I stand outside the bunker entrance. Yes, I've visited personally to research this story and try to imagine Friedrich's state of mind during that final winter. The forest is beautiful. Birds sing. A deer moves through the underbrush, undisturbed by human presence. 84 years ago, this was a death trap. A man froze and starved here while the world burned around him, while millions died in combat and genocide, while history moved forward indifferent to one captain's desertion. The earth kept his secret for more than 8 decades. The bunker held his body, his journal, his unsent letters. The forest grew over his grave, and life continued, soldiers fighting, empires collapsing, new countries forming, generations being born and dying. Until a construction excavator, digging foundations for a tourism center, struck concrete and exposed the truth. How many other bunkers remain undiscovered? How many other deserters died in hiding, their stories untold? How many successful escapes remain unknown because the escapees never revealed themselves? The historian's task is to recover what can be recovered, to tell the stories that evidence allows us to reconstruct. But the historian's humility is recognizing that most stories remain lost. Friedrich Wilhelm Becker's story survived by accident. The bunker seal preserved what should have decayed. The journal documented what should have remained secret. The DNA and dental records confirmed what should have stayed uncertain. We know his story now. We can debate his choices, judge his actions, understand his motivations. We can visit the place where he died and reflect on the moral complexities of war, duty, complicity, and resistance. But we can't know how many others made similar choices and succeeded in vanishing. How many men sat in bunkers or attics or cellars, waiting for the war to end, who didn't die before reaching safety? How many Martin Eichmanns lived full lives under false names, their Wehrmacht service buried with forged papers? The bunker at Gierlaz is a memorial to one man's failed escape, but it's also evidence of something larger: the porosity of history, the incompleteness of official records, the persistence of secrets. Sometimes the earth keeps secrets for 84 years. Sometimes construction workers find bunkers that rewrite historical footnotes. Sometimes the dead speak through journals that survive against all odds. And sometimes we learn that the categories we use to understand war, hero and coward, perpetrator and resistor, guilty and innocent, are inadequate to capture the lived reality of impossible choices in evil times. Friedrich Wilhelm Becker was all of these and none of these. He was a man who tried and failed, who ran and died, who recognized evil too late to prevent it but soon enough to refuse continued participation. His bunker remains, a hole in the ground that contains multitudes: grief, guilt, courage, cowardice, desperation, planning, failure, and the final cold silence of February 1942. If you stand at the entrance long enough, quiet enough, you can almost hear the forest keeping its secrets, and wonder what other truths still lie buried beneath the Polish soil, waiting for the next excavator, the next discovery, the next story of war's forgotten casualties. The plaque says Friedrich died, attempting to escape complicity. That's true as far as it goes. But he also died alone, starving, frozen, in darkness 8 kilometers from Hitler's war room, surrounded by letters he'd never send and plans he'd never execute. He died as so many did in that war, neither noble nor ignoble, neither criminal nor innocent, but simply human, which in the context of history's greatest genocide was perhaps the most damning thing to be. Human, complicit, resisting, failing, trying. The earth kept his secret, now we know. What we do with that knowledge, how we judge, how we remember, how we apply these lessons to our own moral choices when systems of evil demand our participation, remains the question the bunker asks but cannot answer. That's the work of the living, standing in spring sunlight, reading the story of the dead and wondering, what would I have done? What will I do when my time comes to choose? The bunker waits in the forest,